The world woke up to ceasefire this morning. 2 weeks. Pakistan brokered it. Trump announced it on Truth Social, and Iran's foreign minister confirmed it at midnight. But within hours, before the ink was dry, before the missiles stopped flying, Benjamin Netanyahu posted a statement expanding on what the terms this ceasefire actually means. Not just a pause in bombing, not just a reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. Netanyahu framed this moment to present a larger project, ensuring that Iran no longer possess a nuclear threat, a missile threat, and a terror threat, not only to Israel, but to America, to Iran's Arab neighbors, and to the world. This is a significantly enlarged threat definition, and it is a deliberate attempt to raise questions over the ceasefire. What exactly is Israel's endgame? I am Zunaira Azhar, and you're watching Decode, where we define and analyze the stories shaping our world. Tonight, two things. First, how Pakistan brokered this deal, the overnight diplomacy, the phone calls, the frantic hour before Trump's 8 p.m. deadline, and what these 15 days of ceasefire actually mean for the region. Second, we dissect Netanyahu's ceasefire statement, one in which he presents Iran not as a contained adversary, but as an enlarged multidimensional threat to the entire region and beyond. Nuclear, missiles, terror. We decode what that framing means and what it signals about what to expect from Israel while these negotiations happen. Let's begin. On Sunday, April 6, Pakistan, through its Army Chief Field Marshal Asim Munir, formally circulated a two-phase truce plan to both Washington and Tehran. Phase 1, an immediate ceasefire and reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. Phase 2, 15 to 20 days of negotiations towards a comprehensive settlement with final in-person talks in Islamabad. The framework was called the Islamabad Decode. Iran's initial response was firm rejection, as Tehran had been consistent that the opening of the strait would only happen if there is a permanent end to the war with guarantees. Washington, for its part, had set an 8 p.m. Tuesday deadline for Iran to open the strait or face what Trump described as an expansion of strikes on a scale that could wipe the civilization. What happened in the hours between Sunday night and Tuesday's 8 p.m. deadline is the actual story. According to Reuters, Axios, Al Jazeera, and multiple sources reported, Field Marshal Asim Munir was on continuous calls described by sources as overnight into Monday, with three interlocutors: U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance, U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, and Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif on Tuesday, hours before the deadline, posted directly on X, urging Trump to extend his deadline by 2 weeks. He called it an opportunity to allow diplomacy to run its course. He invited delegations from both the U.S. and Iran to Islamabad on Friday, April 10. Iran submitted a 10-point proposal. Trump called it a significant step and a workable basis on which to negotiate. He said almost all the various points of past contention had been agreed to, and the 2 weeks would allow the agreement to be finalized. At 6:32 p.m. Eastern, 88 minutes before his own deadline, Trump posted on Truth Social, the ceasefire was on. 2 weeks, both sides, Strait of Hormuz to reopen. Iran's Supreme National Security Council confirmed it formally Wednesday morning, saying Tehran accepted the 2-week ceasefire and would negotiate in Islamabad beginning Friday. Let's talk about what Pakistan actually did here. Not decode it, not analyze it, just say it plainly because it deserves to be said. Pakistan pulled two superpowers back from the edge. That is the sentence, and it needs to sit for a moment before we complicate it. Think about the weight of what Pakistan's Army Chief Field Marshal Asim Munir carried into those overnight phone calls. On one end, a U.S. vice president whose president had threatened to obliterate an entire civilization by 8 p.m. Tuesday, on the other end, an Iranian foreign minister representing a country that had just lost its supreme leader, buried thousands of its citizens, watched its petrochemical infrastructure reduced to rubble, and still said, with guns pointed, that it would not open the strait for a temporary deal. And in between those two immovable positions, one country, one army chief working through the night with no official mandate this government would publicly acknowledge, and no guarantee that either side would hold. And then consider where Pakistan sits in this moment. A 900-kilometer border with Iran, so every bomb that falls on Tehran is felt in Quetta. It signed a strategic mutual defense agreement with Saudi Arabia, so every Iranian missile that hits Riyadh is Pakistan's problem as well. It is simultaneously fighting a war in Afghanistan. It is running on a 4-day work week and emergency fuel rationing because the Strait closure has shredded its energy supply chain. A 15 to 20% Shia community with strong ideological bent towards Iran, and its prime minister, who nominated Donald Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize, and those old videos were resurfacing to haunt him at the worst possible moment. A country carrying all of that chaos in the middle of its own crisis to pick up the phone and try to stop a war it was not fighting. That is not a small thing. That is a statecraft under fire, and it worked. The established channels of mediators like Qatar had already declined to lead the talks. The United Nations was watching from the sidelines. China had made 26 phone calls but was not in the room. Egypt and Turkey were co-signatories of the framework, supportive but not the ones holding the line. It was Pakistan, Islamabad, a country that the world has too often looked at with doubt rather than credit, that stepped into this vacuum twice, which no one else was willing to fill, delivering a ceasefire 88 minutes before the bombs were supposed to fall. PM Shehbaz Sharif wrote on X with what he called the greatest humility. And the word should not be read as a weakness, as Pakistan stand in front of the world and say, we helped, we showed up, we held. Iran's ambassador to Pakistan praised the effort publicly. Egypt's foreign minister called Foreign Minister Azhar to coordinate Iraqis. Iran's foreign minister thanked Prime Minister Sharif by name. The acknowledgement came from every direction. Every party that was holding a gun across a table last night said quietly that Pakistan helped lower it. That is the story, and that story deserves to be told with full credit before we get to the complications, because the complications are real as well. So now, the complications. The ceasefire is fragile as well, in addition to its merits. Iran's 10 points proposal, according to the reporting by the Foreign Policy and NPR, contains demands that the United States would find very difficult to accept in totality, including the lifting of all sanctions, withdrawal of US combat forces from the region, Iranian control over the Strait of Hormuz, and crucially, the right to continue uranium enrichment. This last point appeared in the Farsi version of the proposal but was absent from the English version shared by Iranian diplomats with journalists. That discrepancy alone tells you something about how much ambiguity is still embedded in this deal. Iran's Supreme National Security Council, in its own statement, was pointed. This does not signify the termination of the war. Our hands remain upon the trigger. Those are not the words of a side that considers itself defeated. Trump, meanwhile, declared total and complete victory. We won, okay? While his own White House press secretary said negotiations would continue. Both things cannot be entirely true simultaneously. Pakistan's Foreign Office still has not officially confirmed its own role, and the silence is deliberate. It reflects both the risks of claiming the credit if the deal collapses and the domestic political sensitivity of being targeted by those who do not want peace in the first place, and that too delivered by Pakistan. Let's treat these 15 days as a temporary resolution with a countdown. The question is whether the negotiators arriving in Islamabad on Friday can bridge a gap that 6 weeks of war and deep mistrust has widened considerably. Let's talk to Johar Salim, former diplomat with extensive multilateral experience in the field, in the world, representing Pakistan. Thank you so much, Mr. Johar, for joining us. A big moment for Pakistan. Everybody is talking about it. We should be happy. We should be proud. We are formally the sole communication channel between Washington and Tehran, and Field Marshal Asim Munir worked through the night to deliver this framework. Yet the story of Pakistan being on the tightrope between Saudi Arabia and Iran continues, remains a reality. How do you look at that?
Well, Pakistan has excellent relations with both the countries. We have fraternal ties with Iran. We have a very close and relationship with Saudi Arabia, fraternal ties. But the nature of relationship is different now because with Saudi Arabia, we also have, this defense cooperation, particularly this SMDA that has been signed. And also with Saudi Arabia, we have sort of a huge expatriate community there. Saudi Arabia is also one of the sources of, I think, the biggest chunk of our energy imports. Biggest chunk of our remittances also come from Saudi Arabia. So it's a very important relationship. And needless to add to that, because it's a known fact that Saudi enjoys a special respect because of the Saudi king's position as the custodian of the two holy mosques. So that is an important element too.
Right.
In diplomacy, diplomatic tightropes are not unusual. They're not uncommon. Often you have to walk those because why? Because many a time your friends are not friends with each other. It's it can happen, or they could have issues sometimes with them. But that doesn't mean that generally that that should affect your relation one of those countries or the other. So I think Pakistan has the capacity to walk through this tightrope, or Pakistan has the capacity and the capability to, first of all, stand on principles where required, like Pakistan did. At the start of this conflict, Pakistan condemned the attack on Iran. But similarly, when Iran attacked the infrastructure in Saudi Arabia, Pakistan condemned that as well.
Yeah.
And as you would have noticed just yesterday, when Iran attacked the petrochemicals installations in Saudi Arabia, Pakistan had a strong statement on that. So such a principled stand helps you to have that trust, whereby the countries respect your position. They respect the fact that you want to have your sort of close cooperative ties with both the countries involved in similar instances, and despite the fact that they may have a range of differences.
Right. I was looking at Iran's 10-point proposal, and by all reporting, it contains demands that the US cannot easily accept. Full sanctions relief, withdrawal of forces, uranium enrichment rights, Strait of Hormuz control. Trump calls it workable. How do you read that word in that phrasing? Is this a genuine opening for negotiation, or is Trump framing a very difficult gap as already bridged in order to claim a political win later?
Well, President Trump has, he's a deal maker. That's what he has claimed as well, and that he has demonstrated multiple times. If they have agreed to those points as a framework, these are not the final points, of course. They'll be negotiated, and that is exactly what is going to happen now. From now on, when they sit on the table, they will be discussing each and every one of these points to a great length, and then there'll be sort of give and take on so many of those points. And the final agreement, inshallah, once it is arrived at, could be very different to this framework.
Mm-hmm. The ceasefire announcement, as soon as it was made, almost immediately by continued missile launches from Iran towards Israel and Gulf states, including a gas facility in Abu Dhabi catching fire, it continued. Iran's own SNSC said this is not a termination of the war. What does that tell us about how Iran is entering these 2 weeks as a party who is committed to de-escalate, or as a party who is still trying to negotiate from a position of ongoing pressure? Because in any case, they think they have survived this. So they would think that they have somehow still the leverage.
That is not unusual, like in many ceasefires, actually most ceasefires, there are some violations, and then gradually they climb down. We saw a lot of violations when the Gaza ceasefire was effected. We've seen violations previously, when Pakistan-India conflict.
But what about Lebanon? What about Lebanon? Netanyahu categorically says that that is not part of it.
No, that is a question of interpretation. And in international diplomacy, sometimes, certain sides, they try to maximize their position or their gains by, coming up with a very unique interpretation of any understanding. So Israelis are, very, very clearly they're trying that. They're trying to take refuge under the pretext that, that this is our interpretation of this understanding. But I think in the coming days, the Americans will have to clarify that. So what exactly has been agreed? In terms of the cessation of hostilities. And my understanding would be that if, that would include Lebanon as well. But it is for President Trump to clarify this point.
Pakistan's Foreign Office, why do you think they would not officially confirm its own role? We all know Field Marshal Asim Munir's involvement is the basic involvement sourced from everywhere. Prime Minister Sharif spoke on X, not in a formal press conference. Why is Islamabad operating with this level of official silence when it comes to the formal channels like Foreign Office?
I wouldn't call it silence, but I think I personally think it's good. First of all, there were no leaks, from the Pakistan side at least, otherwise, there are always very many leaks when such negotiations are being carried out. And sometimes they undermine the process. Mm-hmm. That didn't happen here. Pakistan was, very professional in terms of carrying out these negotiations. Secondly, in Pakistan, why there have been no statements and, because it's not about taking the credit. Pakistan is not interested in that as much as it is interested in laying a path to peace. And I think that's the right approach. Let other countries, or other personalities who are interested in blowing the trumpet do that. But from the Pakistan side, this has not happened. Mm-hmm. And that's a good thing, because when you don't do that, then, the international media, they get more interested, sometimes. And that is why we see Pakistan all over the international media now.
Oh, yeah.
So
for the
why
right
should we blow our own trumpet? Yeah.
Right. So 15 days expire on roughly April 22nd. How do you look at it? How do you analyze the situation? Is there going to be a concrete agreement in your opinion? It might extend. Does Pakistan keep doing what it's doing and attempt another round in case it doesn't work this time? How do you look at it?
Yeah, it's a very, very important breakthrough, of course, and it's rightly something that we can be proud of. At the same time, as I said before, it is work in progress. It's not done yet. This process has just started. A very important step forward has been taken, but that is the first step. We have to prevail through these negotiations to ensure that there is an agreement. And what could be the challenges on the way that we could face, or these countries could face as well. Like I said, the diametrically different positions that they have. Okay, there is a formula of sort, there's a framework, what they're calling the 10 points for framework. And I've had a look at it closely. There are interesting points. Okay, some of the points, they're fine. Wouldn't be too many problems about those. But, the concerns of both the countries are there. Like, for instance, from the US side, the nuclear issues there, the missiles issues there, the proxy support is there. From the Iranian side, the guarantees that they want are there. They want the control, some sort of control of the Strait of Hormuz. That is there,
most critical one, I would say.
Yeah. And then they also want the American military de-escalation from the region. Mm-hmm. Now, that's also, again, it's all open to interpretation. Some people are saying that they're calling for all the military bases to be removed. I don't think so. Or at least I don't think that's going to happen. What can happen
because
is
it's much more to diplomacy as compared to what it seems to be. Thank you so much, Mr. Johar Salim, for joining us. It was a pleasure having you on our show. And we have a dimension which we must discuss. That is, what's going to happen inside the Oval Office? The lobby that has been behind this attack on Iran, how would they react? After a short break. Welcome back to Decode once again, and let's look at the American angle of this ceasefire. What probable problems could that angle add to this very fragile ceasefire? We have with us Anas Malik, and he has an extensive field experience as a journalist, as an observer. Let's talk to him. Anas, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Zunaira, for having me on the show. It's an absolute honor and privilege to be here on Express and, of course, to be on the same screen as yours. Thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure is all mine. We were talking about the ceasefire and something that Netanyahu said, which extensively, to me, it portrays as if he is enlarging the threat. Lindsey Graham, Netanyahu, the hawkish lobby that drove this war into the Oval Office were on record urging Trump to reject any deal unless Iran made major concessions. The ceasefire is now almost there. Iran's uranium stockpile is still in the ground. Is Trump going to face an open revolt or opposition from the same people who got him into this war? And does he have the political capital inside his own coalition to hold this ceasefire against the pressure?
The short answer to this is yes and yes, but I think the longer answer would be for US President Trump, it's more of a war of survival internally as well, with the midterm elections just looming in, just around the corner, literally around the corner, less than 6 months away. I think for a president who's been so rhetorical in the fact that there will be no more wars, that there will be no soldiers dead under his watch, and you've had more than 15, 16 servicemen dead already since this unilateral military aggression against Iran began on the 28th of February, or jointly by US and Israel. So for US President Donald Trump, he's got a very, very tight rope to walk on, either to cater to his home base or to his domestic audience, or to his rather vote audience, to whom he for years he had been promising that they will be out of these never-ending wars. That is number one. And number two, the other problem is that in case if that doesn't materializes and he sings to the tunes of this constituency and this foreign constituency, when I use the word foreign constituency, it is the influence of the likes of Benjamin Netanyahu, those in Israel or those from Israel who enjoy a certain amount of clout or influence within the American foreign policy circle. So it's a catch-22 situation, but I personally think that, yes, President Trump will be able to hold back the pressure that this foreign influence blood pressure that would be exerted upon, and that is the reason this ceasefire has come into play. Despite the fact that a short while back we saw that statement coming in from Israel that had sort of dehyphenated Lebanon from this ceasefire proposal.
Yes, I'll come to that.
President Trump would.
I'll come to that, but I was just thinking that just a night ago, Pete Hegseth and the Pentagon were publicly positioning for escalation right up until the deadline. The Joint Chiefs were at the podium with Trump when he was talking about the obliteration. 24 hours later, there is a ceasefire. How does a military establishment that was posturing for its largest strike package since the Iraq War absorb a 2-week pause brokered by a country like Pakistan? And is there a version of this where the Pentagon might work against it?
I don't think so that the Pentagon would want to work against something that way, given that Hegseth himself comes from within the system. That is number one. And number two, my understanding would be that
system.
Pentagon would...
A lot of people believe Pentagon is a system in itself.
I agree. I concur to that thought. But with that, I think what the Pentagon would rather be taking this 2-week pause or a temporary ceasefire as more of a strategic pause, that in case if they are to resume, then they are very well prepared. They can come over their shortcomings, particularly when it comes to those drones that have been flying in and damaging those communication radars. We have seen those visuals coming in from Bahrain, from Kuwait, where critical communication infrastructure, US military infrastructure, had been damaged and had been hit by these kamikaze drones. So, I mean, to my understanding, to my assessment rather, Pentagon would rather be taking this temporary ceasefire as more to do as a strategic recalibration on their part, that in case if the ceasefire does not hold and if they have to go back, then they go back in far more prepared. Zunaira?
Right. So, well, Trump claimed total and complete victory on Truth Social. But Iran's uranium is untouched. We all know that. Its enrichment rights are still being claimed in the Farsi version of the deal, and its Strait control is now formalized as part of the ceasefire terms. When the details surface publicly, as they will, and the gap between Trump's victory declaration and the actual terms becomes visible, which voices in Washington move first to call this a capitulation? And what does that do to Trump's ability to close a permanent deal?
Well, to my understanding, the ability for President Trump to close the deal still remains very much on the cards, number one. Number two, when it comes to the uranium bit, I think that is something that will still be spoken about when the negotiations happen in time to come, and that would be, this coming Fridays when the negotiations start. What we're given to understand is that this will be at least a 2-day process, so it's not just on the 10th, but rather the 10th and the 11th as well. To what my understanding is, having spoken to the interlocutors who were present and who have been communicating with both the sides, the United States and Iran as well, Iran has signaled or hinted at giving up its IAEA or JCPOA safeguarded enriched uranium, that is to the point of 3.67%, which JCPOA had allowed it. That's what the hinting has been, or the posturing has been. But until and unless, as they say in diplomacy, it's not done until it's done. So until there is a penned out agreement, and I think what would be interesting when it come this Friday in Islamabad, there are 15 points that the US has floated, then there are 10 points that Iran has floated, and then there are 5 points that Islamabad and Beijing have floated. So there needs to be a midway, and I think there will be a midway. In about 48 hours from now in Islamabad will be the hub of activities, Zunaira.
You mentioned Lebanon, that, it simply goes on and on over there, what's happening over there, and Netanyahu refuses to apply this ceasefire to that territory. That brings me to the pro-Israel lobby, AIPAC, the neoconservative, influential in foreign policy infrastructure, hawkish Senate Republicans. They have spent decades building the case that Iran must be permanently defaced. Netanyahu just publicly reminded Trump of that in his ceasefire statement on X, of exactly that mandate. How much pressure can that lobby realistically apply on the Islamabad's negotiations? And is there a scenario where Senate Republicans weaponize the ceasefire's gap to block any final agreement from being ratified?
Well, for a president who has more so focused on being unconventional and not really keeping in consideration of what the laws and what the rules are, I don't think so that US president would be deterred by any such blackmail, as one would put it. I can't find a better word to that. But I think, yes, there are riders, there are always spoilers that are willing to work behind the shadows to derail the process, and that spoilers could be in the form of these senators, the AIPAC influence that is
sorry
enjoying,
to
of course.
Interject, but what about Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner? Iranians openly said that whenever we were negotiating, we were so clear that they are not talking on behalf of President Trump. Rather, they are talking on behalf of Netanyahu. So even the negotiators belong to that lobby that we are talking about.
No, I agree, and I'm not going to disagree on that. But with that, I think that is what the Iranian side learned the hard way. The Iranian side have utmost zero confidence in the negotiations efforts that have been led by Steve Witkoff at large, and that is the reason we're looking at what we're looking at now. That the Iranian side, in the course of these talks that have been these closed-door negotiations that have been rather taking place since the 13th of March, or back-channel diplomacy, since the time when the Pakistani Prime Minister was in Jeddah and Shehbaz Sharif, and alongside the Pakistani military chief, Field Marshal Sayyid Asim Munir. And then we saw those meetings in Oman, then there was a delegation of the IRGC in Islamabad, which nobody was willing to acknowledge on the record, but if you follow it, you know. And then off late as well, very recently, when there was an IRGC delegation, again, just this past week, the Iranian side has been focused on one thing. It is to have someone that has, quote, constitutional authority, holds a constitutional office. And I think that is what the deciding and dividing factor would be, that what sort of concessions and leverage and authority would presumably J.D. Vance, the U.S. Vice President, in case if he gets to lead the delegation, be carrying, or would he too be acting as just as a liaison between Tel Aviv and Washington?
That was my last question to you. Do you consider J.D. Vance in the same camp as Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, or is that a different camp, more political one?
I think it is a different camp because for J.D. Vance, it's also a matter of his political survival as well, given that, as per reports, he intends on contesting the next presidential elections. So it's a matter for his political survival, and if he's seen as siding with an irrational camp, let's just put it this way, then he gets to lose home base, home audience, and those brownie points that can eventually benefit him in the longer run when he gets to run for the presidential polls.
Anas, thank you so much for a very, very candid analysis. Pleasure to having you. So a ceasefire brokered hours before further damage, and a deal that both sides describe very differently. That is the fragile architecture of this pause. And into that fragility, within hours of the ceasefire announcement, Benjamin Netanyahu posted a statement, not of relief, not of closure, but of a much larger demand. One that names Iran as a threat not just to Israel, but to America, to the Arab world, and to the world entirely. Nuclear, missiles, terror. That is what we decode next. A short break, and we'll be right back. 4 hours after Trump posted the ceasefire on Truth Social, Benjamin Netanyahu's office issued a statement that said it supports President Trump's decision to suspend strikes against Iran for 2 weeks. It supports the U.S. effort to ensure Iran no longer poses a nuclear, missile, and terror threat to America, Israel, Iran's Arab neighbors, and the world. And it added curtly in a single sentence, the 2-week ceasefire does not include Lebanon. 3 sentences, 3 geopolitical bombshells. Let's decode them one by one. The first, the enlarged threat definition. Previously, the Israeli framing during Operation Rising Lion back in June 2025 and through the start of the current war on February 28th. The stated objective of Israel was specific. Iran's nuclear program and its ballistic missile capability, which Netanyahu has described as 20,000 missiles intended, as Iran defined it, to erase Israel from the map. The word terror has, of course, always been part of Israeli rhetoric about Iran, but the formulation in this statement does something more deliberate. It lists nuclear missiles and terror as a triple threat, all revised in one breath. And it names the projected parties not just as Israel, but as America, Israel, Iran's Arab neighbors, and the world, in that order. This is significant rhetorical expansion. By naming America first, Netanyahu is embedding Israeli strategic objectives inside a U.S. security interest, making Israel's endgame for Iran appear coextensive with Washington's own. By naming Iran's Arab neighbors, he is reaching towards the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait, who have all been hit by Iranian missiles in this war and who are now implicitly positioned as stakeholders in whatever outcome these negotiations produce. And by adding the world word, he is globalizing the threat in a way that makes any future Iranian recovery, any restoration of nuclear or missile capacity, a matter of international concern, not just Israeli, not just American concern. This is not incidental language. This is framing the negotiating terms for Islamabad before the delegations even land there. The second, what this demands from the negotiations. Iran's 10-point proposal includes the right to continue uranium enrichment. The enrichment question is the central unresolved issue, and it is the one question on which Iran has been most consistent. Netanyahu's statement says Iran must no longer pose a nuclear threat. Trump, for his part, said Iran's uranium stockpile will be perfectly taken care of, and earlier declared that the US would eradicate Iran's nuclear and ballistic missile program. The gap between Iran's demand to enrich and Israel's and America's demand that Iran have no nuclear capability is not a minor procedural gap. It is a central question around which this entire war was fought, and it is still unanswered. What Netanyahu's statement does effectively is remind Trump and the Islamabad delegation that Israel will not accept a deal in which Iran retains meaningful nuclear enrichment capacity. Israel has said this before the war, during the war, and now in the ceasefire's first hours, it is saying it again. The third, the Lebanon question, which is excluded. Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif stated explicitly in his X post announcing the ceasefire that it applies everywhere, including Lebanon. Iran's own ceasefire conditions included a permanent cessation of hostilities on all fronts, including Lebanon. Netanyahu's office stated flatly the 2-week ceasefire does not include Lebanon. This is a direct contradiction of what Pakistan brokered, what Iran demanded, and what Shehbaz Sharif publicly announced. Within hours of the ceasefire, Israel, which has been conducting a ground incursion in southern Lebanon and strikes in Beirut, had effectively carved Lebanon out of the deal scope entirely. In other words, the ceasefire exists in Iran, but the war continues in Lebanon. And because Hezbollah is Iran's most significant regional proxy, the one through which Iran projects power into the Levant, any attack on Hezbollah during the ceasefire window is, from Tehran's perspective, an attack on Iran's interests. That creates an obvious pathway to the deal breaking down long before April 22nd. We have been joined by Afzal Raza, who is the bureau chief of Iranian state news agency in Islamabad. Thank you so much, Afzal, for joining us, and welcome to our show. I was looking at Netanyahu's statement that names America first in the list of those who are threatened by Iran, ahead of Israel itself. And this positions Israeli objectives as synonymous with U.S. security interest. Do you think it's deliberate? Because it looks like a diplomatic strategy to lock Washington into Israel's definition of an acceptable outcome. And do you think it would work? Because Trump has already declared a total victory.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Yeah, this is a very doubtful thing because the Zionist leaders always seeking to be put in the priority list by the American leaders, not even the current war, the 40 days war, but for some decades ago. I mean, himself, the Netanyahu, I mean, many times try to convince every U.S. president to be more cautious on the Israeli interests. And for that, they need to address the so-called concerns of Israeli, which mainly and main objective is to targeting Iran. And now, since last night, with the mediation of the Pakistani military political leadership, and the outcome is on the ground right now. So it was not surprise for us that the person who are alleged and in many cases with the genocide in Palestine, in Gaza, and now trying to make some noise against the what I call the fragile ceasefire due to that Israeli factor. Mm-hmm. I mean, the main concern right now, that should be same concern for the mediators as well, that the Israel, I don't think would be silent and would not take any negative step to make some hurdles in the way of the process of this mediation and the diplomatic efforts. Which we will witness in coming days, maybe on Friday, for the negotiation between the parties. But the international community, I mean, this is obviously it's almost a concern for the Iranian side. It is not a new thing for them, but it is up to the international community, mm-hmm. as well as those brotherly countries, including Pakistan, which leading this mediation role. They should take care and be, awake about such suspicious activity by the Israelis.
Well, Afzal, in my opinion, Netanyahu has presented and crafted a new definition of the threat. It says there is a threat from Iran, and it presents Iran as a triple threat now. Nuclear, missile, terror. Terror has always been in their rhetoric, but pairing it with nuclear and missile capability and then attaching it to the US, Arab neighbors, and the world, it is much more expansive and enlarged a threat framing. What does that expanded frame require in concrete terms of any deal that emerges from Islamabad? Do you think this kind of fragility can take care of what they are doing?
You see, they are finding the old narrative, but trying to more update it in their sense. I mean, they're accusing again the old accusation against Iran, but trying to be more sharp, trying to be make a new pressure while US is willing to come to negotiation table. I mean, they need to bring
But let me interject here. In their opinion, now the threat is even bigger because Iran, which was a threat to US and Israel previously, is now a threat to the neighboring Arab countries as well and the world at large. This is a large framing.
Yeah. I was watching some Israeli media reports and their television. They are all shouting on the U.S. president that how he can accept these conditions from Iran without, attention and paying concern. What Israeli wanted from the outcome of such ceasefire, the interim ceasefire between the U.S. and Iran. I believe they will intensify their plots against the current efforts for the diplomacy until the U.S. and Iran manage to make a deal either in the first round of negotiation in Islamabad, either they are successful to extend this negotiation process. So I believe they will intensify the negative role to make more fragile this process and use such plots to undermine every efforts making by the parties of the conflict as well as the mediation sides like Pakistan.
Right. So this ceasefire in which our Prime Minister explicitly said that it covers everywhere, it covers Lebanon as well. Netanyahu's office said it does not. So Iran's 10 conditions explicitly included Lebanon as well. Within hours of this announcement, there is a fundamental contradiction in what has been agreed. So which version of the ceasefire is actually in effect at the moment, and who has the authority to decide?
They should be. I mean, when the leader of this mediation process, I mean the Pakistan, when the Honorable Prime Minister of Pakistan clearly mentioned the immediate effective of the ceasefire between the parties and others group, including Lebanon, it's taking responsibility as well as towards the U.S. Even if U.S. wants to be more to pleasing Israelis and wanted to show some flexibility, it make Iran much worry and concern for their position as well. Iranian foreign minister already warned for such negative activity, even for not abiding to the 1 point, even from the 10 and 5 points of the agreement for the interim ceasefire. They need to be apply every single of points regarding the ceasefire. Yes, this is obvious that because Israelis started the invasion and attacking Lebanon just after starting the aggression against Iran, and
right.
This is some of Netanyahu's aims to have some front. Have some more fighting to prolong his system in Tel Aviv and make some scenarios for his people that we have still under threat. It is maybe
so
a bigger
threat
threat
has
from
to go
Iran
on
and still under Lebanon.
for various reasons for this narrative over there to prevail and for the upcoming elections as well. My last question to you, Iran's Farsi language 10-point proposal included the enrichment rights. The English version did not. How do you frame it?
What was the line?
The Farsi version of whatever the enrichment rights that Iran wants to sustain and contain, it is there in the Farsi language, but it's not in the English version.
I think such technicality and
is it deliberate?
In details should have been changed between the parties. I mean, if you are asking me what is in the Farsi version, it is from the 1 and 10, including the stopping the fully cessation of the war from the aggressor, lifting the sanctions, including the secondary sanctions, ending all of anti-Iran resolution from the UN Security Council and IAEA, and protect the rights of the groups which affiliated with Iran, including the Lebanon, and more important thing, the sovereignty and the control, the Iran's control on the Strait of Hormuz should be discussed and should be find a flexible way to end of this crisis.
Right. Afzal Raza, thank you so much for joining us. So let's put this together. Netanyahu's statement, it is not a statement that welcomes peace. It is a statement managing the terms of peace from outside the room where the peace is being negotiated. The question now is whether the delegations arriving in Islamabad on Friday with these stated positions can find a version of peace that satisfies all of this. That is an extraordinarily difficult task, and the 15 days on the clock are already running. A ceasefire that Pakistan brokered, a statement that Israel issued, a peace process that Iran accepted with its hand still on the trigger. The Islamabad talks begin on Friday. The parties arriving will carry 3 incompatible versions of what this ceasefire means and 3 incompatible versions of what peace requires. The 15 days are not a resolution. They are a test. And tonight we know the terms of the test are already contested. So tonight, we began with a deal brokered overnight by a country that was simultaneously running austerity measures, managing its own domestic protests, and fighting its own war on another border. A deal that Trump announced 88 minutes before his own deadline. A deal that Iran accepted while saying its hands are still on the trigger. And then we decoded a statement 4 hours after that deal that changed the terms before the negotiations had even begun. Nuclear, missile, terror. America, Israel, Arab neighbors. The world, Lebanon excluded. Tonight's thread is this. The ceasefire is real. The contradictions inside are also real and are equally real, and the 15 days ahead will determine whether these contradictions can be resolved or whether they were always too wide to bridge. Pakistan is hosting, the world is watching, and the parties arriving in Islamabad on Friday carry with them the weight of 6 weeks of war, thousands dead, and demands that, on paper, cannot be satisfied at once. 15 days, that is what the world has. I am Zunaira Azhar. This was tonight's Decode. Good night.